Hello, everyone. Welcome to my online teaching learning session. I am an academic counselor for psychology courses for your BA courses here. We were doing perception. Speaking of perception, we give a quick introduction of talking about it. When we speak about monocular and binocular cues that helps in depth perception, that states our this time depth perception. Depth perception speaks about something which is a distance and depth. Perception that will talk about distance and depth. Speaking of that, remember, when we speak about depth perception, it helps the distance and the judging of the depth is helped through two cues. One is called the monocular cue and the other is called the binocular cue. Monocular cues are cues which are helped and done in the space of one eye. So when I'm going to talk about something which is going to be a monocular cue, it will happen with one eye of ours. It does not make use of both the eyes. Then we talk about something which was the binocular cues. Binocular cues are something that would support with both the eyes. As you see the image on the right, you see that binocular cues and binocular cues have differences also. They do not function like one another, and also they are different in the way they help you in judging the depth perception. Going back to your life, you will check that when we talk about depth perception, if it is not present, like when you do not have an ability to judge the distance and do not have the ability to judge the depth of an object, you will not be able to function. Let's take an example. Why do I say that? The example suggests us that let's take an example of walking on a road. If there is not a depth or a distance which is perceived by you as a walker or as a driver, you will not be able to ever understand the distance, not be able to walk, not be able to drive. So this is what depth perception does to us. Another major example of life could be climbing up the stairs, which becomes difficult if depth perceptions are not present with us. Also, speaking of it, little children playing with football, not possible. You cannot aim the goal, you cannot hit the ball. You probably will not be able to see my presentation in online teaching learning session while walking, because you cannot perceive the depth between the distance while you're walking, and also you would not be able to see the phone and perceive the phone better. So this is what we talk about depth perception, an ability to judge the distance of an object and have a human body functioning and moving. Now let's come to the cues separately. When we talk about monocular cues, as I discussed, monocular cues are something which you see while walking, while running, while judging any distance, but only with one eye. So monocular cue helps in judgment, remember, with one eye. Also remember, these are also called psychological cues. Why these are called psychological cues? Because these are not something which are physical in nature. They are not physical. They are not using your accommodation. They're not using your eye lenses. Rather than they're using something which is your experiences of life. So that's why these are called psychological cues. And also at some point of time, monocular cues are also called painting cues. Very good example. Nowadays, our paintings are getting more 3D. An image which is made, it looks so real. Painters use these cues, which are called monocular cues, for you to see an object moving and probably find an object running. So this monocular cue let's start our journey in understanding what are the monocular cue. Let's start with the first monocular cue that we have, which talks about relative distance. When we talk about relative distance in that cue, you will find relative distance talk about as soon in the terms of distance. Relativity, that means an object which is placed in the front and an object which is placed at the back, it is going to look smaller, and the object which is in the front will look something which is in on bigger, and it looks more closer to you. So the size of it is going to be far, far bigger, and it's going to look something which is larger to you, not very humongous but larger. Also make sure that we understand, I'll give you another example for the relative distance. When people are walking, standing up on the terrace, and when you're standing in front of the terrace, what happens? The the vision of the person who's coming from a distance looks very small. You find that person very small. Why? It's relative distance. You find their size to be very small because of that relative distance and relative size, because they are farther away from you. That's why, in comparison, that you see people, you will find a person who's at the back of the first person who's in front of you would be larger, and the person who's covered will look smaller. The image also depicts you the same on the traffic light while two people are crossing. You will find the person who's in front looks a little bigger, and the person who's at the back looks a little smaller. So this is what we understand in terms of relative distance and size. And the other one is a really beautiful one that you all will understand. That is called as texture gradient. Texture gradient is not something which is always available to us, but might be while you're trekking, while you go to a flower garden, or at the times it could be available to you also when you're looking at things which are heavier on texture and on things which are sometimes lighter on texture. I'll give you an example for this, but the best example is the picture which is in front of you. The picture suggests the flowers. So when we see the flowers, you will see in the picture, the flowers at the closer, the one that you see in front, are so nicely placed. You can identify the distance. You can see what space and how the spaces are aligned in front of you. So you know there's a space between the flower, 2 rows of flowers and 3 rows of flowers. See at the back of the picture, as the farther you go, the flower bed looks all closed and jammed. It's because of the gradients. Gradients suggest us something, that as the texture gets farther away from us, it gets delusionalized, because it's a one eye Q. Remember, it's not a double IQ. It's not something, as I said, as monocular Q. It's binocular Q. It's monocular Q. Bino is a physiologically aided Q. Mono is a psychologically aided Q. That's why when you see it, you will feel that the flowers which are just in front are very thick. They tell you the space. They tell you where you can navigate and go. But at the later end, when you see a flower bed from a farther away distance, you will not be able to make the difference between them. Also, coming back to the same that we understand, moving to next, after this picture, you will find another monocular cue. Remember, monocular cue are again and again emphasized functioning from one eye. They do not use both your eye. Let's move to another one. The other one that we talk about is, which is called the aerial perspective. The aerial perspective talks about the shades and the air which delusionalize your perspective in play. So when we speak about aerial perspective, remember, the monocular cue is functioning in a way that helps your air and distance function together. So when air and distance are functioning together, what is happening? See, aerial perspective always has this thing that is found in hilly areas and areas of something which is as suggested. In areas that you visit, mountains are best example for monocular cues and aerial perspective to tell you. Why? Because it has vapors. It has something which has haze. So objects that are perceived at a distance and have the presence of haze looks very, it looks very dizzy. It looks white in color. I'll give you an example of ours only. When I remember going to any hilly area at the time when it is not snowing at all, I still found the mountains blue and I still found the mountains very icy. The reason for that ice that I perceived was because of the aerial perspective. There is no ice in the month of June or probably July or probably in the month of May. There would be only their Rocky Mountains. The only thing that you will find is the haze which is around, which is dust particles accumulated, makes us perceive that the environment is hazy, it looks white, and it might appear like it appeared to me icy. It did appear to me something which is covered with ice. So as the distance goes away, the haze, the dust particle covers your mountain and it gives you a very whitish color shade or a blue color shade also. You can see that in the image that I just presented to you. Let's move to another second, which is the fourth monocular cue that we come down to. This is called linear perspective. A very beautiful perspective and a beautiful cue this is. You can find this around yourself a lot. So it happens like, when two adjacent lines are placed together at a distance. Let's take an example that you have a thin threads, black color threads that you have placed parallelly. Okay, if you do not understand adjacent, it's parallelly and it's very long. From a distance that you see, closer the threads would be seen, it will have a lot of distance between the two. And farther you see them, you will feel that they're joining at some point of time. This happens while you are watching railway tracks. This is something I'm sure everyone might have seen. As the distance go farther away, you feel that the railway tracks are joining somewhere. And as you see them from closer point, you feel a lot of distance between the two tracks. So the distance between the tracks gets smaller and the distance between the tracks get bigger when you see it from close. Did you remember one basic understanding of monocular cue? Monocular cue says a difference of farther and closer. So closer, the perception changes. Farther, the perception changes. So did happen with something which is called linear perspective, didn't it not? So as you see linear perspective and two adjacent rails and walking across, you'll find the rails in the front of you, which is very close to you, farther away. The two rails have a distance between them. But when you see them moving, moving away from you, you will find that they join at a point. This also happens while we are going to an area where we drive, and you find the roads which are exactly the farther away area, they feel to be joining. So as you travel to that road, you get to know that there is a distance, there is a road ahead of it. Now, this is the most common that you find around yourself, especially living in metro cities. We will all find linear perspective available to us. Then comes interposition, one of the most simpler thing that you can assume. It is said that the objects which are kept closer will look bigger, and the objects that are kept farther away obviously will look smaller. So this cue is very simple. There's an example that you get over here is, see, there's a circle, there's a triangle, there is a square. They all are the same shape, remember. None of them, neither the circle nor the square is bigger in proportion or dimension. They all are the same. But what is happening? It is because of your monocular cue, the perception of distance and depth that they enable you. The circle will look bigger because it's closer to you. And the triangle is the one shape which is looking smallest to you. Triangle is not smaller. The dimension of all the three figures are same. So this is what the beauty is of monocular cue. This is interposition. This can also be understood, when one bottle is covering the other bottle, you feel that the bottle which is kept in front of you is bigger in size, but you never know that both the bottles could be of similar size. So this is what the five that we've discussed already. We've discussed relative size, texture gradient, aerial perspective, linear perspective, and interposition. All of them has an image to have you a proper distinction between them. Now moving to monocular cue, which are further left with us, and then we'll move to binocular. There is another cue which is called accommodation. Ideally, accommodation is a physiological cue which happens with both eyes. Don't we know that? We've studied biology. We talk about eye in that perspective. Accommodation is when the lens adjusts itself to accommodate a object at a distance. So closer you go to the object, the lens get thicker, and the farther that you move away from the object, the lens get thinner. So that is called accommodation. Simple one. So I don't want to repeat that. Then we come to motion parallax. It's one of the most amazing monocular cue that you will find, which is motion parallax. Motion parallax is a cue of movement. It was given by Gibson, who stated, best example, I've given a picture also of a train and a girl sitting in the train. When you're sitting in a train, don't you feel that the objects which are closer are moving at a very high and a different speed and faster? And the object which is farther away sense to be moving with you at a similar speed. So that is called, which is motion parallax. Motion because your body is in motion, and parallax because the objects which are farther away, they move slower and they move with you in the same direction. But the object which are closer to you moves in the opposite direction and faster. Best example, trees that you encounter while you are in the train are something which is motion parallax. I hope that is good and everyone understood. Please look into the picture that will make you understand that how does motion parallax function. Very simply while you're sitting on the train. Now, let's move to the binocular cue. A point to be noted about binocular cues are more stronger than monocular cues. Binocular cues are weaker. Simple reason for that is mono happens from one eye, bino happens from both the eyes. And when we talk about bino happening from both the eyes, you should understand that it is a physiological cue also. It happens because the information from your eyes moves to your brain and it's interpreted. That's why it is more strengthened and it is more stronger than the monocular cue. Also, the process of gaining binocular cue to assess depth is called stereopsis. So, your ability to understand binocular cue in humans to assess the depth and distance is called stereopsis. That's an important term to understand. Also, I'm sure a lot of you would have felt that does mono and binocular cue present in all of us from the beginning. So are you born with it to make you understand and keep a note of it? These cues are not there in us when you're born. So as a 2-day child, as a 10-day child, as a 1 month child, you will not have binocular and monocular cues with you. There is only sensation which is present. Perception is a gaining process which happens with time. So always remember, when we are talking about these perceptual abilities of assessing a depth, assessing abilities, which is monocular cue and binocular cue, remember that happens by the time of infancy. Infancy, which is by 2 years for some children, 1.5 years for other children, and maybe later for somebody else. But it's an ability that you learn. It's not an ability that you are born with. Let's go back to something which is binocular cue. Binocular is a physical cue. Remember, you will have to have a physical ability, like a physical movement of your eyes for this to happen. Experiences do not come into play like the monocular cue over here. So first is retinal disparity. You can practice this with me right now. Retinal disparity is that easy, and I have a picture in front of you to see that. You can do it while you see my lecture. You can close one of your eye and see the image, which is see me like this with one eye. So you will realize that both the eye have a different image of me and there's a gap. So what one eye gives an image of me and another eye gives an image of me, there is a disparity in the two, which is there is a distance which is an average of 6 centimeters, 6.3 centimeters that we have. So this is called retinal disparity, which is the object, same object, has a disparate view from both the eye. So closer is the object, greater is the disparity. So the more closer that you, have, like take a pencil here, the disparity is going to be more. Take a pencil away, the disparity is going to be less. So this is again a physiological ability, which is a retinal disparity that you see. And it helps us to do what? It helps us to form the image of the object in both the eye in a disparate view and understand as it becomes closer and as it goes farther away. The other one is convergence, again a physiological ability of the eye. It is convergence is what it is the angle that the eye makes with the object. So it's like if the object is at a distance, like farther away distance, the angle of convergence is going to be very smaller. So remember, if this the angle goes smaller, if you get it here, the angle is larger and it strains your eyes. So it just talks about a physical ability of use, which is called convergence. I've given you an example for that also. Nearer the object, it gets very, very, very stringent to your eye. It pains. Your eyes will pain if you see an object or your own finger like this. So this is something which happens because of conversion. So when an object is at a distance, the angle becomes very smaller, and the object comes closer, the angle becomes very larger. It's very opposite to retinal disparity. Disparity is stated as the object comes closer to your eyes, the disparity becomes greater. Here, the angle when the object moves away becomes smaller, right? So that is conversions that we complete with, and this completes with monocular and binocular cue together. I'll give you a quick revision for all of that when we talk about monocular and binocular cue. It's an ability of depth and distance. So depth perception is an ability of walking, driving, climbing up the stairs, probably also climbing down the stairs, running. So if you do not have this ability, you cannot compete with people because you do not know at what distance the person is running from you. Depth perception is so highly important for us. Okay, and it happens to be supported by two kind of cues, monocular and binocular, that I explained. Now we come down to a new concept, which is called movement perception. We understood something, motion parallax is a cue, and also did you understand while we are moving we can also perceive. So it doesn't happen that when you stop moving you do not have perception. Perception will still be there while you're moving or you're not moving. That really doesn't matter. So movement perception is an ability to judge the speed and direction of an object. So while you're moving, your eyes do have the ability to judge the speed of an object or probably the direction of the object. I'll give you an example. While walking, let's take an example. You're taking an evening walk in your area, and there's a person who's just running next to you, coming and running next to you. Obviously, the person is running and you walking. The person will go ahead of you. You will get to know the direction. The person, moves next to you. Get to know the person is moving towards my right and in front of me. That's the direction. You get to know the speed. The person is running in a very fast speed. You can assess the speed is high or low. So it is an ability of our eye and of our brain to assess the direction and speed of an object. Movement perception doesn't happen, just like that. Movement perception is explained with four concepts that we have. That why does it take place? Simple concepts. The first is retinal motion. Why are we able to assess the speed and direction? Because of the retinal movement. The object forms on our retina and we are able to view it. That's the simple physiological concept of the eye. The object falls on your retina, you assess it and you're able to detect it. The second is motion after effect. This is like the term motion after effect. Like if you fixate your gaze, like if you look at one object which is moving, like a moving object, let's take an example of race that you're watching, a car race, go-karting race that you're watching, or probably you're watching something on television which is moving and moving for some time. Let's take for 1 minute, more than 2 to 3 minutes. If you watch it, you will feel when you move your gaze, when you move your eyes to a stationary object, you will feel the stationary object is also moving. Why? Because the ability of your eyes to judge the direction and speed is still there, and your gaze are still moving. Your retinal images are still moving. So you still find the stationary object to show movement. So this is one reason that there is movement perception. Another reason why there is movement perception. This is why we are giving these concepts to make you understand. You can find it in your environment and you can judge why movement perception takes place. When a smaller body is surrounded with a larger body, the larger body seems to be moving in right, you will find the smaller body moving to the left. It is very common, isn't it? It happened with motion parallax also. You are sitting in a train, right? And probably one body, which is smaller, will be moving in the other direction of the larger body. This is induced movement. It's called induced because the larger body is surrounding the smaller body. So if the larger body is moving towards the right, the smaller body will move towards the left, right? There's another expression of making you understand that movement perception is there. The reason for this is apparent movement. Apparent movement is when a object which is not moving is presented in a succession, it seems that it's moving. Movies are a best example for this. For example, pictures. They are stationary, coming one after the other. After a while, you feel that they are a series of events which is happening. A best example for this is, at one point of time when your Diwali faith had a small box and there were pictures that were moving one after the other. If the pictures did not move in succession, that means it did not move in speed and continuously, you will not find that to be in motion. But when they're moving continuously, you find them in motion. That is aiding your movement perception. Best examples are five phenomena. The picture I just showed. Stroboscopic effect is the movies. The reels which are playing at the back. If the reels halt in between, one scene, another scene, remember movies will not be possible. You cannot watch movie. And the other is autokinetic effect, which is just in front of you. Check this picture. This picture has no movement, but it seems to be moving. Why? Because of the induced movement that we've given and the image after effect that is happening. We feel that every one of them is moving, the yellow color image which is in front of you. So this is how movement perception is so beautiful. It gives you an ability to assess the direction and something which is the speed. When speaking of movement perception, there was something which is also called as size perception. What is size perception? See, when we have the ability to, while moving, know the direction and know the distance and speed, size perception is an ability, an object that you see from all the side or any side, but the size remains the same. I'll give you a simpler example to understand it. It's an ability to understand the shape of an object despite seeing it from all the direction. Best example, you go to a restaurant, there's a round plate. Round plate from the left side might look oval, but we all know it's a round plate. We usually get one center plate that you eat on is always round. Why is this happening? This is happening mostly because of your experiences. So, size perception is an ability to know the size of an object from all the direction and despite moving from right, left, or top, bottom. So, it is defined as that our ability to judge a stimuli correctly and obviously with the distance change. No matter you look it from the right, no matter you look it from the left, you will find the shape and the size of the object similar. Now, there was some hypothesis, which is some aided hypothesis, which supported the size perception to tell us that size perception is something which is very relevant. So, speaking of it, the first one is size distance hypothesis. It has a little formula also attached to it, but the formula is very simple as you will see on the screen. So one is the perceived size and the perceived distance. So what did these people say who gave us this form? The SDIH, which is the size distance invariance hypothesis. Why invariance is there? They are trying to tell us that the perceived size and the perceived distance, they both are the same. So they mentioned that the perceived size and the perceived distance are same. That's why perceived size upon perceived distance is equal to visual angle. So what is the perceived size? Let's take an example. You have a small box in front of you. Perceived size and perceived distance is how far it is. How far are you perceiving it to be? So this invariance hypothesis says that there is a proportional relationship between them. So they are proportional to each other. That means they're equal to each other, right? And what is the visual angle which is coming into play? Visual angle is the angle that you make with that object. So when I'm telling you that there's a box in front of you, the angle that your eye is making with the box is called the visual angle. Visual angles are very important. They are very important because every object that you see forms an angle with that object. It could be a right angle, it could be a 30 degree, it could be a 25 degree, anything. So what is the formula? Your perceived size upon perceived distance is equal to visual angle. Now another thing, let's take an example. We don't know the distance, but we know the size of the object. But we don't know what's the distance, how far are we? So if the distance is not available, remember the perceived visual angle, which is the visual angle, is aiding you to understand the size of the object. So, but when the distance is there, remember when the distance is there, the whatever the size is formed on the retinal image is equal to the size of the object. So I'll explain this again. Formula says perceived size upon perceived distance is equal to visual angle. Now let's take an example. We know the size, but we do not know the distance. So the distance is not available. When the distance is not available, the angle helps us and support us in knowing the size, right? That's how the formula functions. Now when the distance is available, what do we do? When the distance is available, then the object which is formed on the retina is equal to the size. So the size which is formed on the retina will be equal to something which is the distance also. So that's how this functions. So it directly says that the size of the object and the distance is equal, right? Now, there was another one which helped and supported this size perception, that we have the ability to understand the size despite the distance changes from it. It's called the familiar size theory and Q theory. Very simple it is. They try to say that whenever you are, there is a Q which is used to not only judge the size but also the depth and the distance from the. So they are trying to tell us that we usually, when are watching an object, we are familiarized with that object. So when I gave you an example of that dinner plate which is kept on the table, remember you use Q to judge them. You know it's a dinner table and you know it's a dinner plate. So dinner table and dinner plate usually are round. Remember, if it's a serving plate can be of any size. It can be a rectangle, it can be an oval. So you do not have a familiarization of that event. So when you do not have experiences, remember, you do not have Q. When you do not have Q, you cannot address and understand the distance and the depth. As simple as that. I'll give you another example. When we meet friends over the phone and we are connected to one another over the phone for a very long time, when she was very young, and now she's talking to you till the time she comes to a higher class or she comes to graduation, like you. So you haven't seen your friend for so many days. So remember that the image or the size that you form of her will be according to the pictures you have seen. So we have a familiarization with the help of the pictures. Remember, if you do not have pictures, then you will not be able to understand the size perception of it. So this simply says the visual angle plays a very important role over here. So, for example, you do not have a familiarization. You have never seen the person. So, how do we know the distance? What becomes the cue? When familiarization and experiences are not the cue, then your angle, visual angle becomes the cue. So, as the stimulus decreases, the distance decreases, the size of the stimulus also decreases. So, remember when you see an object from a distance, the size will be smaller. As it comes closer, it becomes better and better. So now the cue becomes the visual angle. So the visual angle is too big, too large. Remember, the size of the person will be very small. It's too small. You're able to understand what's the size of the individual. Then we come to the last one, which was given by Gibson in 1979. This is the theory of direct perception. So Gibson usually denied the other two hypotheses. Gibson stated there isn't any size distance invariance. We don't call them equal. He also denied there is no familiarization. We don't use experience so casually. He mentioned that there is a correlation simply between the perceived size and perceived distance. There is. So there is a relationship between the size, perceived size, and the distance. So let's take an example. If there's a box kept in front of you as an example taken, there is a relationship between the box and the distance, but it is not directly proportional, it is not equal, but there are other stimuli that governs the percept of a particular situation. So remember, if it's a darker room, the box might look very smaller. If the room is very lightened, the box will look very larger. So there are other stimulation which governs your understanding of that object perception, which is the size of that object perception. I'll give a quick review for this. This is important, and it does not have something which is we see in our daily living. It is more theoretical. So what is size perception? Size perception is your ability to understand the size of an object, of a stimuli, no matter you see it from any direction and distance. So you see it from left, right, direction is too far, too less. So you should understand this is the size. So if you have a bottle of 100, like 1 liter, you know 1 liter bottle, you see it from top, you see it from bottom, it should look the same to you. So that's what is called size perception. Now, the first hypothesis was size distance invariance, giving us a formula: size upon distance is equal to the visual angle, which is the relation is very simple. Size is equal to distance, the visual angle comes down when you do it mathematically. So they are trying to say there is a direct relationship between the two, which is distance and size. Now coming to the next, familiar size theory states that the cue for judgment becomes your familiarization, which is your experience. So when you have already seen a dinner plate, which I gave an example, you'll be able to understand it with the help of the cue of familiarization. Do you judge it with your experiences? For example, if the experience is not present, you judge it on the basis of the angle which is formed. So angle is the visual angle. How far and how close is that object from you? Closer the object, the size becomes bigger. Farther away the object goes, the size looks smaller. Last theory was which I stated was the theory of direct perception, which was given by Gibson. 1979 it was, and he stated that there is no direct relationship between the size and the distance. It depends upon the other stimuli in the room. There could be many stimuli in the room that can help you to judge the size of an object, which is very true. At times the light, at times the darkness, at times too many people can make you confuse what is the size of the object. So this was very rightly stated by the theory of direct perception that we complete. This was size perception for all of your understanding. Now speaking, we understood perception. Let's go back to our understanding from the first. We understood Gestalt psychology spoke about perception. They were all, Gestalt is a figure. Gestalt says whole is bigger than the sum of the parts. So if you want to understand the whole, you need to organize your perception. How did you organize your perception? We made use of laws. I hope all my students remember we made use of laws of proximity, laws of similarity, closure, and symmetry, which were many in number. There were 7 laws that we discussed. So proximity is very commonly found around you. There is similarity, closure being one of the most simpler. Continuity is also a law that you find. So those laws help you organize your perception. That helps you understand that what could be an image and what could be something looking like. So it was only a visual perception that we were talking about with the help of Gestalt psychology. Psychology given by Gestalt psychologists Max Wertheimer, Kafka, Kohler, and Kurt-Kofka, Kohler, and Wertheimer. Now, after something which was visual, we don't just see images and understand. We want to understand them as an object, moving object, object at a distance. We did depth perception today. Depth perception was what? Depth perception stated us that without it, you cannot understand an object at a distance, and probably we can't even function. Human beings cannot function without a three-dimensional. That this is what you study in maths, no? Three-dimensional. You cannot function without it. We walk on a road. We assess the rear view mirror of your this thing of your cars. Driving is impossible. Cycling is impossible without a depth perception. Depth was supported by two cues, mono and bino. We did movement perception. We had theories on movement perception, which was apparent movement, right? And induced movement, motion after effect that we did in retinal motion. That is the aided hypothesis for that. And after that, we did a size perception. So see, we did all kind of perception which is present in front of you. Perception of size, so you understand the size of an object. Perception of distance and depth, which is depth perception, so that you understand moving objects, your functionality is there. And we understood visual perception in the last lecture, which was having the ability to view something. Now, when these perceptions happen, there are possibilities that we can have errors in our perception. So errors are what? Are misinterpretation. So sense organs give you the correct information, but we interpret that stimuli wrongly. That is called as errors in perception and also defined as illusion. There are many illusions that you will find in the environment. This is the first one that we will come down to. Before that, I will tell you something which is very simple and common. We have two kinds of illusions, which we all are, knowing, which is individual illusions and something which is common illusions. Individual illusions are something which is just your illusion and the other person does not understand it. Like you see something and you do not interpret it correctly. Like let's take an example. You saw a blue color and you feel that the blue color is not blue. The blue color is all somewhere having a green tinge. It's green in color and it's very dark. So it's not a blue color. Your friend says it's a blue color. So this is an individual illusion that you're having because of the shade, because of probably you're not interpreting it well. So this is an individual illusion. And one is a common illusion, which a culture, a society, a culture which is living together, a culture which is following a common norm, which is a rule will have it. So speaking of that, remember illusions can be common and illusions can be individuals. Another common illusion that I will all give you, if people in the desert area can associate to this illusion, which is mirage, one of the most common illusion for people living in the desert areas, and also if we travel. And even I feel today metropolitan city has so much of heat that we all can view this. You can check it because it's summers at the moment. When there is a shade of the tree falling on the road and the sun is shining too bright, the road looks wet. It is not something which is wet. It's the reflection of the light on the road which is falling and reflecting back, which makes you feel that the road is wet. It is not wet. It's the reflection of the light which is falling on the shade of the tree. So there's a huge tree. Under the tree, you feel that the road has water. It does not have water. It's the sunlight, extreme sunlight, which is reflecting and making you feel that it's wet. It's one of the most common illusions that we all see. Now let's come to a few of the individual illusions which might not be visible to all of us. So see, first of all, before I set the illusion name, I would like to ask you, the image that you see on the screen, which line could be, bigger? Is it the line which has arrows and the line which has arrows out? Anything. It could be the A or the B. This is called the Mueller-Lyer illusion. Mueller-Lyer illusion is a geometric illusion because it will be found in lines only. It would be found in geometrical paths, something which is mathematical and illusion, which is lines, standing line, horizontal lines. There's a vertical horizontal illusion also, which is a geometrical illusion. This is called Mueller-Lyer illusion. The thing is, both the lines are equal. None of them is smaller than the other. They both are equal. So the problem and the illusion is caused by what? What is causing the error? The error is the arrows. The arrows which are closed inwards make you feel that the lines will not move beyond the arrows, and the arrows which are open makes us feel that the lines are moving. So we usually feel the second line is bigger than the first line, but it is nothing like that. Both of them are of same size. The same, it's the same size. their length is same. They do not differ. So line which is pointing inwards, it seems shorter to us, and pointing outwards looks longer to us. You can find it in any object that you see around. If you feel an object has open areas, that object looks bigger, and if an object is closed by something, looks smaller. The other one is a Ponzo illusion. Ponzo illusion is also an optical illusion. It is like when two converging straight lines distort our perceptions of the size of the identical line drawn across. This is something that we have just studied. I don't know if you guys remember. This was one of our cues that we had. I hope all of you remember this. The railway track cues that we had, the linear perspective, linear two lines moving together. So remember, the lines which are closer here look smaller, and the line which is farther away looks bigger. It seems that it's coming out of the boundaries. It is not. It is because of linear perspective. It is distorting our understanding of straight lines. Why? Because linear perspective states that the line, when seen parallel and adjacent to one another, meets. And when they're meeting, they look closer. And if you draw the line there and draw the line closer to you, you will feel the line which is farther away is bigger in horizontal direction, because it is moving out of the boundary and the other one is not moving out of the boundary. So this is something which is called Ponzo illusion. It is again very common but not seen much around us in comparison to Mueller lie. Mueller lie is a very applicable illusion because it is geometrical illusion. That's why. Now moving to Ebbinghaus illusion. Ebbinghaus was a psychologist who researched for memory and also perception. So he's one of the famous psychologists we have. We will study this in one of the next lectures that we have with you. So Ebbinghaus illusion was a simple illusion of relative size that we studied as the first monocular thing. So let's see the image. What is it? It says that, see, both the circles, the orange circle seems same or not. I feel a lot of you will find that the one orange circle which is surrounded by smaller circles are bigger, and the one which is surrounded by bigger circle is smaller. But if you judge them, they both are the same. It's because of relative size. As relative size suggests, the more the number and more closer it is, it looks small, it looks bigger. And the farther away that it goes and it's surrounded by many objects and it's crowded, it looks smaller. So this is a relative size perception that we have. Very common. We do find this happening around ourselves. Whenever an object is crowded by huger object, it looks smaller in front of it. And when it is crowded by smaller object, it looks bigger. Very common illusion, something that you can see around most of the times. Also, always remember, illusion is something which is causing discrepancies in your awareness. So remember, it is causing some defects in your awareness, which is sensation is there, but the interpretation is incorrect. What is perception we studied? Perception is first point. Sensation comes to you, you attend it. So something goes wrong with attention and making meaning of it, and that's why discrepancies happen. There's another illusion. This is a very lovely illusion. There's if people are staying in Delhi NCR and even outside Delhi NCR and other metros, this is an Amis room illusion. Very commonly seen. This is also a perception of relative size. How relative size? When a size is closer to you, it looks bigger. When a size looks farther to you, it looks smaller. Similarly, like Ponzo illusion, when something is closer to you and surrounded by bigger object, it will look small. It is surrounded by smaller objects, it will look big amongst the smaller object. So Amis, I'll give you the picture. You will love this. I'm sure everyone has seen it in pictures who are traveling, going to museum. This is one of the museum in Delhi NCR that you can see. And the illusion is something also that you might see in pictures of people if you visit that museum. Why this is happening? Did you see the angle of the person who's standing exactly at the extreme distance? That's farther away. Remember, a person who's farther away to us, what will happen? We will find the size of the person smaller. And closer the person comes to us, bigger that the person will look. It's a complete example of relative size. An exact example of relative size. Amis room illusion. These are kind of, knacks which are used by museum to help you enjoy and take pictures and get amused. So this is relative size illusion. Another illusion which was Poggendorf illusion, not very common. It's not seen by most of the people. It is something which is again a geometrical illusion. It's not an optical illusion like that. It is a geometrical illusion which is on the paper. Can be seen optical is something where the retinal image is formed through the optic nerve. So that was relative size, and Amis room and all the other that we did. Poggendorf illusion will give you more clarity when you see the image which is presented. Here, when we see oblique line intercepted by a blank area, defined by two parallel lines. So it will result that the oblique line does not appear to be straight. So it will not look straight to you. You will find this, that the oblique line is interrupted and it goes in some opposite direction. But that is not the thing. Look at the picture. The black line seems to be coinciding with the light orange line. No, it is going in the same direction, but the object which is intervening it makes us view that it is something which is an illusion. So it feels that it is broken into two, it is moved in the other direction. It has not moved in the other direction. It started like this and it is in the same direction. So an oblique line when it's intersected by a blank area, when you feel that it is intersected with joined with another line on the parallel end. So that doesn't really happen. It is only because of the blank area which is kept in front of you that causes you a geometrical illusion. These segments are very beautifully shown. You will see the dark orange line is the line which is actually coinciding with the black one. It's not the orange, but it seems that it's the orange. It moves like this. It goes in this direction. It does not happen. That's an illusion, a Poggendorf illusion. Not very commonly seen by everybody. It will only happen when you view examples like this. Now, moving to last portion that we need to have an introduction. We understood perception. We understood perception is a meaningful interpretation of your attention and sensation. Perception is followed by, once you perceive, attend, you have either, you have a monocular cue, you either have a binocular cue, or you have illusions. You have discrepancies that we studied. You can have an Amis room illusion, which is very common in the museums that you will find. You can most commonly have an illusion which was that we did over today. The most common illusion that you actually find here is something which is the moon illusion. Moon illusion is not mentioned. Moon illusion is a very simple illusion. That state is, when it's also a perspective that we've studied before. When a motion parallax, moon illusion function in that it is covered with clouds and moon seems like a smaller part. That's why moon moves in a same direction of yours. So that's a moon illusion, which is very common. It's a common illusion that you can name out to. Mueller-Lyer is also another common illusion that you can find, right? Which was a geometrical illusion. Optical illusions are very less seen around our environment. So when you perceive, remember you perceive to do what? If illusions are not formed, you will learn things. So you sense, you attend, and you learn. Learning happens how? And what is learning? Learning is a behavioral change, remember. So any relative change in your behavior which is resulted from experience is called learning. I'll give you some features. You can see the content on the screen. Learning has three major features. First, it is relatively permanent. That means more or less learning will be permanent to you, right? Second, it will cause some behavioral change. So let's take an example. If you learn psychology and if you have learned what is psychology, how did psychology evolve, there would be a behavioral change. You will understand the sensation, the behaviors and mental process of people better. Why? Because there is a behavioral change that has happened in your ways of expressing and talking to people. So that's a behavioral potential which will change. And how? What is the mandate for it to change? You're bound to have an experience for it. So if you do not have an experience, please do not experience a relative permanent change. Now, there are some, the example which is given, I will read it for you. Behavioral is a is a relatively permanent change in behavior or behavior potential resulting from experience given by a very famous writer and psychologist, Barron. You find Barron books. It's by Barron. Now, remember, learning is a very key factor in us. You cannot survive without learning. If you do not learn, how do we function in the society? If you do not know what I taught you today, how will you interpret the perception of depth and size and movement? So, behavioral change is extremely important. Remember some changes which will not have an experience, why it is not permanent. So, relative permanency comes with experience and behavioral change. But if, let's take an example, there is no permanency, and how that permanency is not got because there is no experience. So remember, relative permanency is equal to experience. People taking alcohol, any change in their behavior at that point of time is temporary. It's not permanent, right? Any medication that you take, which are sedatives and are having high tranquilizers, and you're feeling dizzy and your behaviors at that point of time, remember that is not a permanent behavior. It's happening because of medication. So that's temporary. There is no experience that you have there, okay? You do not have any experience there. You do not have a permanent change. So you have a permanent change when you have an experience behind it. Now, learnings are of types that we will study. So your entire content which will be coming in your next session would be motor learning, verbal learning, concept learning, and discrimination learning. Out of all of them, motor, I'll tell you some brief words so that it gets helpful and it gets easier for you. Motor learning is muscle learning, right? Verbal learning is learning that uses speech, letters, and words. Concept learning are learning of structural concepts and probably categories that you have. Like animal is a category, color is a category. So that's a concept learning. So when we say animal, don't we say like when we talk about domestic animal, let's talk about that's a category. That is a concept. Four-legged, most of the domestic animals that are dogs, are cats, they have four legs and they have a tail and they have a peculiar noise to them. The animals on the land, right? A lot of people have other domestications like cows and everything. So remember, that's also something which is a concept. Now, discrimination learning is the learning that helps you decipher between two things or discriminate between two things. Like, how can we understand discriminative learning? Like the ability to discriminate between a behavioral change by experience and no behavioral change by no experience. Like cycling could be one. You understand a person who's an amateur cyclist and the one who's very beginner. So that's what is discriminate learning. Also in simple categories, having the ability to discriminate between sounds is also a discrimination learning that you have. Now we had two major theories that came in learning. Learning is based on the concept of behaviorism. I don't know how many of you will remember this, but behaviorism quotes when we talk about that behaviors are important. That is what we learn in learning. Behaviors are important. So behaviors are changed here. And J.B. Watson was a behaviorist when we studied in evolution. Evolution had behaviorists stating J.B. Watson, B.F. Skinner, Ivan Pavlov. They gave us learning principles, which is they gave us theories to understand that how learning of behaviors can happen and unlearning of behaviors happen. So these are two major psychologies that you all will study with me and the types of learning that I mentioned, which is motor, verbal, concept and discrimination. Speaking of classical conditioning, conditioning and learning are almost the same thing. So if someone has difficulty understanding the two, remember learning is an umbrella term that will incorporate behavioral change, that will incorporate an experience, and that will incorporate conditioning also. Conditioning is a little mechanical. Learning has its more qualitative experience, like it has quality, it is richness. So that is what is called as something as difference between conditioning and learning. So remember, learning is an umbrella term. Experiences, behavioral change, and conditioning comes under learning. And conditioning as a part of learning is a very huger concept that we will study. So conditioning is a very huger concept. Also, it uses learning principles, and only difference, it's very mechanical. It has an S and R condition that we will study, which is stimulus and response, that I want to introduce to you today and leave, which is what is behavior? Behavior is a response to a situation. So any stimuli that can elicit a response, which is that can give out a response, like a water bottle can give a response. As soon as you see the bottle, you might feel very thirsty. Probably a lunchbox can also be a stimuli. Why not? You might see a lunchbox and you start feeling hungry watching it. Your friend can be a stimuli, can make you feel happy, can make you feel sad, can make you feel nervous. Your teachers are obviously a stimuli. They have the ability to take out responses from you. You get alerted as a response, you get awakened, you get scared if you've not done the work. So that is a stimuli. So what is S and R? Any change, any stimuli that can elicit a response, which is an outproduct giving, is called a behavior. So behavior is S is equal to S, giving a response R is equal to behavior. So whatever R that you get is a behavior. So now coming to something, how it is represented in conditioning. Conditioning had a very mechanical view about learning. So as I said, conditioning has that difference that it's very mechanical. It will have a mechanical and a very theoretical equation that we will study later to introduce you with. So classical conditioning was the first conditioning. That's why it was called classical conditioning. It was given by Ivan Pavlov. Remember, this is the time when behaviorist was allowed to, behaviorists were allowed to do some sort of experiments on animal experiments were very legal at that point of time. Animal experiments were also done at that point of time to understand the functionality of them and then apply those principles on human with a little changes and apply those principles to humans. So first is classical conditioning. It was given by Ivan Pavlov. Ivan Pavlov is a very renowned psychologist, and he was a physician first, then turned as a learning psychologist later. He did an experiment on his dog, and the dog experiment was based on a mechanical theorem, which is stimulus response. We understood what's a behavior. Any stimulus eliciting a response. What does elicit means? Has the ability to give a response is a behavior. Now, Ivan Pavlov attaches another S, which is SSR. So that is stimulus response is classical conditioning, a mechanical view that we will study in the coming classes. Now, that's a dog experiment that was done. And there is another very famous conditioning which is present in everyday life of yours, which is stimulus response consequence. This was introduced by B.F. Skinner, another animal experiment. Animal experiments were done on rats and it was done on pigeons. Pigeons and rats were the two, both of them were analyzed, and there was a Skinner box that was made, and these animals were assessed and their behaviors and learning was assessed in this. And it is further called as something as operant conditioning. Operant conditioning has a different theorem. Did you see? It's not SSR learning now. It is stimulus response and consequence. So there is a consequence which is coming even after your response. So we do have a consequence which is coming after. So remember the difference that we found, so that when we go ahead, we do not find it difficult. Learning is a relative change in the behavior. This relative change is permanent when it's backed by an experience. If you do not have an experience, which is if there's an addiction, alcohol addiction, and a behavior there, it's not permanent. Happening because of medication, it's not permanent. It's a delusionalized state because of something, behavior not permanent. Right? Now, types of learning that we will do, which is learning. These are permanent learnings: motor learning, verbal learning, concept learning, and discrimination learning. In the first learning theories, before we go to the types, we will have theories having greater impact on the topic of learning, which was classical and operant. So classical conditioning was given by Ivan Pavlov, which was a dog experiment. A theorem which you need to remember is SSR conditioning. Very simple. And once you remember this in this way, SSR conditioning, you will be able to understand the experiment of Ivan Pavlov equally well. Then we talk about operant, which was the second. I'll define you operant. Classical was called classical because it came out to be the first conditioning. It was one of the first conditioning that came into play. That's why it's called the classical conditioning. It has no other logic behind it. The fact that operant conditioning was operant because it stated that there are operant behaviors that leads in a change to form the conditioning. So operands are called instruments. Operant are behaviors that are instrumental in giving changes in your conditioning. So it is instrumental and it is operant. So operant are instrumental in getting that change in you. So this is given by B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner was another psychologist who did animal experiments, which were very legal at that point of time. So that completes with the understanding today. What was perception, which we started with sensation. So remember, sensation is always the first thing that happens to our being. Your eyes, your nose, your touch, your skin, your taste is the first thing. So until there is no sensation, there is no perception. So always remember that. Sensation comes out to be first, then comes interpretation. Your sense needs to be judged. It needs to be made meaning. When it's made meaning and a relevant, meaningful item comes out, it's called perception. Once you have a perception, you need to be learning it. So when you have to learn it, there are learning principles for it and there are learning types for it. That suggests us that learning is a relative change because we do learn our context, we do learn psychology, we are learning psychology. It has to be relatively permanent and it comes with experiences of teaching. That's why it would be permanent for all of you. So, two major: conditioning, classical and operant. Names to be remembered of psychologists are very important. Ivan Pavlov and B.F. Skinner. That completes the concept of learning, which will initiate that the two learning principles have been relatively greater in the understanding of principles. Now, another thing to be remembered: learning principles are correlated and are a part of behaviorist psychology. Behaviorists were J.B. Watson and Ivan Pavlov and B.F. Skinner's that we talk about. So, this completes our learning process and finishes the understanding of something, which is your conditioning, learning being a part. So, learning is the umbrella term that we know, and within learning, remember conditioning B is a part. Conditioning is a smaller part. Conditioning is not something which is not going to be without learning. So that completes our session. I hope everyone had an understanding of it. Thank you and namaste.